Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I'm very excited today to have Steve Miletto, a lifelong educator for the past 37 years, currently the executive director of North Georgia Regional Education Service Agency, and also a podcaster with the Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 podcast, which is how I first discovered you, Steve, through your podcast. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thanks so much, Anika. I appreciate you having me here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you. I've enjoyed listening to your podcasts, and I can't wait to have this discussion.
Well, thank you, and likewise. So what prompted you to go into education in the first place?
It seems like sometimes yesterday, sometimes it seems like a very long time ago, which it is. And I liked history, and I wanted to be a history teacher. And the funny thing is that in those days, what I was thinking about was trying to figure out ways to help kids want to study history, want to know more about history, and to show them the fun and stuff like this. And that had a lot to do with it. And by the way, my dad was somebody who loved to stop at every marker and read them, and would read every sign in a museum and stuff like this. Yeah, I kind of hesitated telling him that I really enjoyed some of that, but I've turned into him now. So
I get that. My father was a professor, and I remember hearing long soliloquies about what Nietzsche would do or Socrates' approach to an issue. And, you roll your eyes, but then eventually you're like, oh yeah, I get it.
Very cool. And so that's what drove me into it. And then so one of the things I wanted to do was make it interesting, make it fun, because history is fun and interesting and has lots of issues and challenges and stuff like this. And one of the things I discovered right away is that there's more to teaching than just the content. And you start discovering that you're a counselor and you're a semi-parent, and you're trying to help them figure out how to advance in how they see the future and stuff like this. And there's any number of extra things that you're doing there, but a big part of it is being a cheerleader too. And it just trying to help them find what they like and figure out how they can use it, help them achieve what they, their dreams, what they want to for the future. So there's cool stuff. And as a note, I had fun. I like to do simulations and role play games, and I had costumes and all kinds of stuff like that. So
it was a life for your students.
That's what I was trying to do. Yes. And so it's cool when I run into somebody who's 40 years old now and go and remember some of those days. So cool stuff. But anyway, so that's what led me into teaching, and my career's kind of gone different places since then. So
yeah. So, and then you were also a coach, you've been a teacher of the year, you've gone into administration, and now executive director.
Yeah. So, one of the things that happened along the way, I like to say I had two mentors in my teaching time frame, administrative time frame. Basically, both of them were named Bob, which makes it a lot of fun. What are you talking about now? But the first Bob, he was very focused on being able to make schools a place where teachers can teach and kids can learn. And it was focused on the kids as the learner and teachers facilitator. And it was a blast, and enjoyed that. And then what started happening to me as I started working for Bob, is that I started realizing that one day I think I want to be a principal, because I can then use some of those similar ideas to help create an environment where teachers can help facilitate the kids' learning and help the kids achieve their dreams and stuff like this. That's what that focus was. And so in order to get there, you become an assistant principal, and you get to wear all those fun hats that an assistant principal wears. And I was in two different types of schools, a smaller, medium-sized school and a smaller system, and then got a chance to move to a much bigger school and a bigger school system. And so got a lot of experience there. And that's where I met Bob number two. And Bob number two was all about community and lots of leadership type of thoughts, and getting involved with community leadership opportunities and bringing those situations into the school and such. And so learned a lot about the role of the community in the school. And that was incredible types of learning opportunities for me as well, and paid off, because as I get a chance to become a high school principal, I ended up at three different schools. My focus was on change. I see myself as a change agent, mark myself that way. And I went to three different schools for similar reasons, but different reasons. But it was all about trying to make some improvement to what went on in the building.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely a change agent. I can see that in not only when I listen to your podcast, but when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, your website, all of the different things that you do, and the fact that you also have a podcast and you do these other things that are really trying to help create change and narrative through voices. and hearing other people's voices and getting their input on things that will help innovate and create a better outcome for everybody, which is what you're talking about right now. So is that what led you to become executive director of a regional education agency?
Yes. So after my third high school, it becomes a thought to do something different and get a chance to work they're called RESAs in the state of Georgia. They're called different things across the United States. We exist in different ways across, I think, 48 of the states. And in the state of Georgia, every school by law is required. Every public school is required to belong to a RESA, and there are 16 of us in the state. And what we do is serve and support those school systems. Their superintendents are on our board, and sometimes they're asking us, hey, I need you to do this. And usually my answer is yes. And then I go to my team and say, hey, I said yes, let's figure this out. And then sometimes we take ideas to them as well. And it's all about serve and support these public school systems.
Yeah. What have you seen change in the public school arena over your career? And I'm sure there's a lot, but
the first thing I have to say is that it's funny how different technology is, because, when I first started, you had the overhead projector. Started off with the giant reel film projector, then it progresses to the VHS video, and then eventually the DVD and all that type of thing. And in there, though, what starts to happen eventually is we get this thing called email first. And that was a lot of fun. You'd send an email to your neighbor in the hallway and you run out and go, hey, did you get my email? I'm going to send you one back, and we progressed from that to suddenly having, in the beginning, a mishmash of computers throughout a school. You might have some Apple or Macs, and you might have some DOS-based, some PCs, and then eventually they start getting their act together and start realizing we need to have a similar sort of product in the building for kids to use. And, it's funny. In the beginning, it was all about trying to figure out what we should use software-wise and, hardware-wise, and can you really keep up with what's going on in the outside world? And there are all kinds of interesting questions like that. And it really progressed forward through a whole bunch of things to where we are today with this little thing called AI. And it's pretty amazing. And I have to mention this before I leave the subject of something else that grew at the same time was a little technology that went from this little annoying thing called a pager.
Oh, yeah. I was actually going to bring that up.
This thing called a pager, and only some teachers and many kids had them. And they would do things like coordinate meeting at lunch or meeting at the restroom or, whatever. And then we get the cell phones. And it's funny. I mean, the BlackBerry, not sponsored by them, but the BlackBerry that existed. I mean, some kids, they could easily have that thing underneath the table and be sending a text like there was no tomorrow and never have to look at the device. And, eventually that grew into the all powerful cell phones, the beginning of we go from the flip phones to eventually the smartphones. And that just changed all kinds of stuff because there's a lot of people in the beginning who are kind of fighting the idea of it. Then it's like, it actually has a use and here's the uses. Then it led to more fighting over it, whether it really belonged to the schools, because it became annoying again with the advent of going beyond texting and getting to social media, where now we're posting things and we're posting things throughout the day and putting stuff on there. And it's like, whoa, okay, you have to have rules about etiquette with those things. And, and today we're back in that realm again. There are countries that have basically said no phones in school.
Yeah.
And there are other places that have said, we're going to have some rules about it. It's just an interesting battle right now that it come through. But I remember the day when they didn't exist. So it's kind of a funny thing. But
definitely. I mean, when I was in high school, we would drive somewhere. I mean, I even drove to debate camp in Appleton, Wisconsin from Lawrence, Kansas. Didn't have a phone. My parents let me drive there by myself. They just had to trust that I was going to get there and call them when I got there, right? I would never let my 15-year-old do that today. But now it's so convenient. I'm lucky that she's not into social media that much. So she knows who she is and what she wants to do for her future career and science and all of that. But it is so helpful to be able to, hey, Mom, pick me up over here today instead because I have this meeting with my counselor, or I'm going to go check this out after school. For those little points of contact that otherwise I wouldn't get. And then you're stuck waiting and not knowing. And then for emergency situations, which we know unfortunately happen more often than we'd like in public schools, particularly.
Right. It's funny because one of the things that you say as a kid, there's many a time that I had to walk a pretty long way home. If only I'd had a phone to call someone and just say, hey, I'm up at school. Could someone come get me? Because it's going to be a while. I was in marching band and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, miss your ride or something. But that's where those things can be very, very handy. But it's an interesting thing especially because today there's apps that, I mean, I know some parents that they have the app on the phone. So they know, at least they think they know where their kid is at all times.
Yeah.
I can remember doing just like what you said, which no one knew where I was, especially in between things. I got there. So
Yeah. So let's talk about technology, because now we also have this thing called AI, which has been around for a while, but that really came, I think, to the forefront of people's minds in the past year when people realized, oh, students can actually use this to try to write papers and game the system. And so how do you weave in AI into the conversation with your schools? And what are you seeing at the K through 12 level in terms of use? Is it more helpful for the teachers, or are you seeing students try to game the system and use it?
I think you'll always see students trying to game the system. All right. I think that no matter what any adult does, there will be somebody trying to figure out how they can get one over on it. And I mean, I was one of those kids. All right. I was always trying to figure out what game I could play with the adults. And if they allow me to play that game, then I knew that was a place I didn't need to spend my attention. I could focus it over on a different class. And I think you're always going to have that. But, one of the things that's happened, and I have to say this, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Airplane from a long time ago, but there's these great little one-liners and all that sort of stuff throughout it. And one of the things that happens in there, the plane is flying and all of a sudden they lose an engine and it kind of fumbles a little bit. And the captain gets on and says, ladies and gentlemen, I hate to tell you this, but we've lost engine number one, but we're doing fine. And you look at the passengers and no problem. They're just looking straight ahead. Everything's fine. And soon he gets on the announcement. He says, ladies and gentlemen, we've lost engine number 2. And don't worry, we've still got a couple other motors to go and no reaction. And then somebody tells him that there's a problem on board and he needs to deal with it. So he makes an announcement, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of coffee. And all of a sudden everybody goes, and that's kind of what's happening right now is that with AI is that when it first came out, everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's the end of the world. It throw a bunch of other things out there. It's Hal from the 60s come to haunt us with Dave, or it's Skynet developing out of the Terminator world. And it's terrible. It's terrible. They're just going to use it to cheat. Nothing good's going to happen. Then it's kind of mellowed out a little bit. And after the mellowing out a little bit, we've gone back into we're out of coffee again, because they start seeing different ways that the kids might use it. Now, I think what's really happened is that let's put the panic aside for a minute. And I think it's just a matter of figuring out how to adjust to the fact that you need to figure out how to help the kids use it and have etiquette for using it and how they can make it work for them. Like, for example, I use AI for right now is thinking of different ways I can say something. So, for example, I looked up, how can I say no nicely? And because I come up with these really bland, sort of dumb statements. And that was one. I was like, whoa, this is cool. It came up with some great ideas that were very nice. And, I've looked at how to say thank you. Someone needs you got this, you can do this, or something like that. I've used it to help me come up with different ways of saying things. And I love different thoughts it comes up with, because it'll come up with multiple ones and you just kind of figure it out. Well, what's going on in the classroom is the teachers are having to figure out how to adjust to the fact that there's probably, once they leave the classroom, kids are probably sitting down and asking questions, and you have to figure out how to incorporate that. And I think another aspect of it is, as part of it, you have to go to old school type stuff too. If you want to know if they can write, you do it in front of me in the classroom on paper with a pencil, nothing else.
Definitely. Yeah. And people are only as good as their prompts, right? That they put into AI. So
Exactly.
I think that also hopefully helps separate the wheat from the chaff, like, who's like really learned how to use these tools and game the system, and maybe who's not quite learned how to use them yet. And so I know for our programs at USC Annenberg, we're being encouraged to incorporate AI lessons into our teachings. And I'm lucky right now I'm teaching PR and branding. So it's more personal. You're not really going to be able to use AI to spit out your personal brand unless enough of the right things to put into it. But I am thinking about, okay, how can I help them use this tool? Because it's so much the future. Right. There are going to be jobs that are purely based on being the human who monitors the AI to see what it's inputting.
Yeah. It's such a huge part of getting ready to be a huge part of our world. Of course, there's some interesting things happening right now. I think there's some lawsuits happening here and there as people are trying to figure out, wait a second, it's using my information. Did I give it permission? And they're trying to figure out whether it needs permission or not. So that's going to be kind of a fascinating world that the schools will have to kind of pay attention to, but at the same time, still figure out how to help the kids figure it out, use it, and not get too upset about.
Now, talking about technology having changed so much over the course of your career and figuring out how to use these new tools, it's been difficult. I'm in California. I know I've heard of in California and Florida and multiple states to recruit and retain teachers and have them feel like they want to stay in classroom. And I think many of them come like you, right? You have a passion for something, but do you think that the tools and all of the different things that are going on that are keeping layered upon teachers beyond teaching in the classroom are creating that gap? And I don't know if you have this issue in Georgia, and I'd love to hear some things that you think about how you can recruit and retain teachers and put them on a path like you, like inspire them to want to continue in education and become administrators and really make systems change.
Well, thanks for that. And I think, one of the things that happened is that suddenly this world, you've got to figure out how to teach, and the kids are not in a classroom. They're on the other side of a screen.
Yeah.
And they turn you off. And those things in themselves, because let's start before that. I mean, teaching's always been something that you really have to want to do it because you're working with human beings. They're not widgets. They have needs and they have ideas and they have thoughts, and they might want to challenge you, and they might want to figure out what pushes your buttons or they might get excited, or 3 years down the road before they graduate, they come back to you and say, I really enjoyed your class on this. I just would never tell you that. But I think one of the things that's always been the case with teaching is that everybody thinks they know how to do it, that they can do it better. And that gets old when you hear that, especially when you're doing things like something you mentioned at the beginning. I also was a soccer coach. I coached goalies for the girls and boys teams, different settings, different schools. I was a yearbook sponsor. I really wanted to go to this new school following Bob One to the new school. And he said, Steve, love to have you there, but I need a yearbook sponsor. And I said, I can do that. I don't know anything about it, but I can do it, And I also at another school was a theater sponsor. They hadn't had theater there in 15 years. The principal said to me, because I said to him, I said, what do you need help with? And he said, well, we haven't had theater here in 15 years. And I said, yeah, you haven't had it in 15 years. I can do that. I got friends I can call on that can give me some help. And we had fun. And there's other things. But to me, that's always part of teaching, is that if you want to connect with the kids and really help them see what they can do in school and stuff like this, you got to do more than the classroom. And that's always been the case. Well, if you speed forward, when you have all this nonsense that happens and everybody's mad at each other, and we've got this where people are mad about, what this pandemic thing was anyway, and whether we should go to school or we should be online. And teachers are then being told, you got to just teach it. Even if they're on the other side, you just got to teach it, and you got to deal with the ones who are turning you off or doing whatever they're doing. Some of them had some unique situations take place where whoever's in the background, and stuff like this. And teachers became very frustrated with that, because then once again, there's lots of people saying, well, we could do this better than you're doing it. And they're like, really? And then you start having families, by the way, which is interesting, going, please have school because we need you to take them back. All right.
Right.
I'm not very good at this thing, and I need you to take them back. So we've come back into this world, though, where, when you had that great resignation happening of all different backgrounds all over the place. And I think that really hit the teaching world also, is to possibly find something else. And I think the ones who really are inspired by working with kids eventually have, in one way or another, found their way back. But it's still rough because the schools are competing across the nation for a smaller pool of teachers. And it makes it rough. So anyway, I don't know if that.
Well, yeah. And I think to that point, on the business side of things, the pandemic sped up small businesses getting completely savvy with tech 7 years before they were really anticipated to need to come online with all of the tools like the Zooms and all the other things that we all had to go, okay, we have to use this not just daily, but like all day. And same thing with teachers. Teachers weren't used to having to teach on Zoom. What are some ways that you think that we can retain and attract teachers and get young people excited about this profession again when they know it's going to be long hours? It's not just, there's admin involved. It's not just what you're doing in the classroom. Students have unique situations at home that you also deal with. Like you said, you're not just a teacher, you're a counselor, you're sometimes a parent, you're so many different things. And you don't always get a lot of kudos and props for everything that you have to pour into the students. But how do you think we can help make it attractive?
One of the things that would help is if the communities put some money where their mouth is. All right. If you want to really find the strong people and so forth, you do have to take a look at, because most teachers across the nation are paid for 9 months, but it's spread out over 12 months. And that's, when people say things like we have the summer off or something like this, that's really what's going on there is they've only been paid for 9 months. And so then most of them go to school and so forth to learn more stuff during the summer. I think trying to figure that out, like professional development that's ongoing, instead of cramming it all into pre-planning or post-planning, trying to reschedule the way they're paid so that professional development is built right in, because every class that you teach is different. Every kid that you teach is different. They all have different types of needs and wants and the way you work with them. And so there's no average that you can work with. Now, with all this that I say, part of what has to happen is the schools have to, one of the things I preach about is teachers have to take a look at the schools they go to. You can't just say, ooh, the first one that offers me a job, I'm going to take that one. And the reason why is you need to do your own investigating to see if it's got the type of culture that you'd like to be part of. And would you want to work with? Like I tell those stories about those two Bobs, I'd work for them again in a heartbeat. When I discovered them, it was like, it sounds like I found them at one time and went, ooh. Bob one, it did work out that way. Someone who knew me, knew what I was doing in another county, said, you're kind of spinning your wheels in that county. You really need to make this gentleman in this other county. And he gave me his number, and it turned out he was looking for a history teacher, and I interviewed with him. And the next thing you know, I was working with him. And so that was helped by somebody who I knew through the community. But I think that part of it is understanding that teachers need support. And you can't just do, like when I started teaching, it was a common thing that you get hired during the summertime, you get your books, you get your rosters. And then pretty much what happens is that you might have some sort of luncheon on the day before school. And the next day the kids show up and it's pretty much good luck. See you in a couple weeks, and you're like, wow, okay. And interesting things happen. You just never know. I had on my first day of teaching, I'll never forget it, because I had a young man who decided to do a backflip into the classroom. I was standing at the door and he does this little boom, boom, boom. And I'm like, I've not met him yet. I even remember his name. I'm not going to say it, but he does his backflip and he lands, he sticks the landing, da-da. And then he goes to turn to walk in the class, because all these other kids are going, ah. And he goes to turn to walk and he trips over the cord to the overhead projector where I had notes set up for what I was going to be talking about for the day. Smashed. The overhead projector broke, and the teacher next door came right over and goes, everything all right? And I said, yeah. And he saw me trying to pick up the pieces of the glass and said, if you need that, he goes, I'll go get you one. And he went and got me one, and I was able to move on. But the point is that who would have thought the kid do a backflip into the classroom on the first day of class? And he and I became good friends after that. But that's part of working with kids. You don't know what you don't know, and things are going to happen. So I'm going to go back to that word support. I think one of the things that happens a lot in schools in the different types of climates, because it's different places, is that some places more support than in others, and where they don't feel like the world's upon them, that they got to do this, they got to do that, they got to do this. Well, there's support in figuring out how to do that and this. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I just think about, again, any workforce, any job, any company, whether it's a school or a private or a public or nonprofit or what have you, you have to make sure that the culture is a fit. That's a commonality that we all have to think about, because I've been places that have been a great fit and places that haven't been a great fit. You have to make that decision. Do you go find another opportunity that fits you better and that where you can really thrive? Or do you stick it out and see and keep on trying and then decide to leave education because you're not feeling fulfilled?
Right, exactly. And that's part of what happens, is that if you don't have that support, if you don't feel like, because another part of support, by the way, is workplace friends. You have to give it time to develop those connections with other people. And I don't mean as something to say, to complain with each other about things. That's not what I mean. The person who says, it's like the guy next door to me that day who came over, and I got to know him well. And he helped me with some different classes and stuff like that, where he was a guest teacher sometimes because of the cool stuff he did. And we became friends. And it's kind of a cool thing, because then you don't feel on your own. You don't feel lost in the woods. You don't feel, that the whole world's coming down on you, because you have other people to go to and ask. And see, that's one of the difficulties in a lot of different types of jobs. But one of the things that can happen to you as a teacher is that you close that door and nobody knows. You're just on your own, man. You could be taped to the ceiling, and then the rest of the building not know it.
Oh, yikes. Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. Let's turn to podcasting. What prompted you to start a podcast?
I was principal and I'd started listening to podcasts. So this is in the early 2000s, and some teachers had told me about these cool things called podcasts. And I was like, oh, that's neat. So I started listening to some, and then I started thinking, well, that'd be cool to do. And then my brain kind of kicked in a different direction and said, yeah, then I'll say something wrong. And the next thing you know is the principal sitting before his boss going, well, I thought it was the right thing to say. And so I waited until I became a RESA director. Then I had a little more time in order to orchestrate it and make it happen. And what I wanted to do was be able to provide, because when I was a principal, I really didn't quite know what my focus would be. Mm-hmm. As a RESA director, I knew what my focus would be, which is supporting classroom teachers and building principals, trying to find them resources of information that might be helpful to them. Mm. And so that's what sent me that direction. And I started at a time when it's cool because of the amount of time that's passed since I started. I started a bunch of years ago, getting ready to post. I'm really close to episode 600. And I started in the fall of 2013. And when I started in the beginning, I had a handheld recorder that I used, a digital recorder. And I would use that and then load it on the computer and stuff like this. And that thing was great, but it would pick up everything. Everything. In those days, there were a lot of people recommending, buy my kit to do this, do that. And it's like, $1,200. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I'm like, there's people doing podcasts for a lot less. I'm going to show the geeky side of me. I had been to a comic convention and I saw a couple of guys having a blast out in front of the comic convention, and they were talking comics and having fun and laughing and all this stuff. And I'm like, there's no way those guys paid $1,200 for that equipment they got right there. And and eventually what happened is I could do everything from an interface that plugs into my computer with an XLR mic. I had a USB mic at one time, and then I've grown to a really cool, it looks like a mixing board type thing that, trying not to say names of products, but it works really nice because it allows me to hook in a number of mics as well as I can play music through it. I can do different things, and it improves my sound, especially the mics that I use. So. But it's grown a lot over the years, and it's been fun. And I remember from the beginning when I was trying to figure out whether I should script. So I'd write a script and then realize that in like 3 minutes, I'm done. And I can remember having hey, I got 2 downloads. All right. And now I've got downloads from all over the world, and I get some pretty cool ones on a monthly basis. And it's just a cool thing. I'm addicted to it.
I'm sure you get to hear such a wide variety of what other people are doing in the field of K through 12 education. Definitely. Think about things that you can bring back, but also share best practices in Georgia with your guests and with your audience who's listening.
Most definitely. One of the really cool things is it's broadened my network. Just tremendous people all over the world who some of them I've reached out to and asked them to come do presentations for our communities around here. And, it's for our teachers and administrators. And some of them, they're helping us figure out how to deal with something because that's their field. It's just amazing. I mean, because first of all, you're in California, I'm in Georgia. So we're on opposite coasts. And, I've coordinated talks where I'm talking to someone who's in New Zealand or Australia, and it's just a cool thing that you can do. And this side of really bad storms.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just amazing. I started a long time using Skype, and Skype was a trip. Oh. and people's understanding of Skype was a trip.
Yeah. It's still a mystery. I feel like Skype's been around for so long, but people are like, wait, do I still have a Skype account? How do I log into it again? How do I use it?
Exactly. And I mean this well, what I'm about to say, but some of them, they were kind of an embarrassment to my age bracket. All right. Because it's like, come on, guys. All right. I'll send you the link and then you just follow the instructions and we're good. Well, someone who was in business said to me, have you heard of Zoom? Because I was trying other things. There was WebEx and there was all these different things that I tried. And so then I latched into Zoom, and I tried Google for a little bit, Google Hangout, and but we're not sponsored. I'm not sponsored. I don't know. The Zoom thing worked really well. And so just about a year and a half before the pandemic hits, I was already using Zoom, and it was so easy for the guests to just click the link. Exactly. And it had a microphone or something to talk with me, a laptop with a camera on it. We're off and running.
Golden. But I'd love to hear one thing that continues you to inspire in education, and one thing that's an inspirational story, something from your podcast that keeps you going.
One of the things that keeps me going in education is that I'm a doer, fixer, trying to figure outer thing. And I think that this world that's happened is prime for that, which is trying to figure out how to help those people who are running schools and who are in the school classroom, how to help them deal with what they're dealing with. That kind of intrigues me to try and figure out how to find resources to help them do that. And because that's that support that I was talking about, trying to be that support for them. And so that's a big part of what keeps me going. And on the other end of it, the idea of something that inspires me and such, I have I got to say this first of all, I've connected with a lot of different people. And one of the things that I think is really cool about this podcast world is that I've taken people up on their thoughts and I reached out to them, whether they've meant it or not. It's like, hey, Steve, I was wondering if you could help me talk about, if you could talk with me about something, because we're dealing with this and I've got, people I like to help. And I think that's a huge part of this network that becomes part of the podcast world. Is it's not just, now it could be, some people, you do their interview, they say thank you, and you never hear from them again. And then there's others that you feel comfortable enough reaching back out to them or something like this. Or they feel comfortable reaching out to you and saying, hey, I've got this other thing I'm doing, and I was wondering if you might help me with it. And to me, that's an inspiration in just the fact that these are people getting along with each other who don't know each other. You're not neighbors who have problems with the branches, and you're not angry at whatever thing you could be angry at, and just working together. And even if you do have differing opinions because you know it because of things you've heard them talk about, you still get along. To me, that's inspiring.
I couldn't agree more. That's one of my favorite things about podcasting, and I'm slightly addicted to it too. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about your journey, things that our listeners should be thinking about when they're thinking about education, the educational journeys?
First of all, and thanks for asking this, I think that as an educator, one of the things that I think is important for them to understand is that one of the cool things about working with kids is that it's never a dull moment. There's never a dull moment. And if you're trying to figure out how to help the kids figure out their future, which is a cool thing to do, then that's where you get your inspiration from. And your thanks may never come until the day you're walking at a animal park in another state and someone says, they look at you and they go, are you Mr. Miletto? Or insert your name, and you go, oh my gosh, I taught you, didn't I? And that's, there's nothing cooler than that. Education is one of those worlds that your reward comes a whole bunch of years later. Someone remembers you because of the time you spent and the effort you took. And, it's so one of the things that I would say here is that, message to educators, don't give up on it, man. Instead, figure out how to make it an experience that they want to remember, participate in, and work at. And your reward happens down the road when someone finds you up in this modern world of all kinds of ways on social media. It's funny when you suddenly get someone going, are you so-and-so? Is it, and it's like, oh my gosh, my world is colliding with the rest of the world. So, and then for everybody else, I got to tell you, if you're not an educator, just help us figure it out. All right. As opposed to everybody, yelling at each other, because it's like, we mean well. We mean well. I've had my share of moments when, as a principal, you start going, I chose this job. And it is one of the coolest careers that you could ever ask for, because of your connections with families and you help make the future for them. And that's what it's all about.
Beautiful. My last question, and of course, I will put the link to the podcast and your website, stephenmiletto.com, in the chat for people to be able to get in touch with you. But do you have a favorite quote or a mantra or some words of wisdom that you live by?
Okay, so when I say this, you have to know that, you can see on my wall behind me, which the listeners won't be able to, but I am a Buzz Lightyear fan from Toy Story. And there's a longer story that goes with this because it really worked to help trying to figure out how to get kids and teachers and so forth to think about what we were trying to do to help the kids achieve their dreams. And this idea came to me one day, which I was watching, dates me a lot because it was Toy Story 2. And I was rewinding back, watching my kids, and I think they thought I'd lost my mind. But there's this scene in Toy Story 2 that really kind of is something that I tried then and inspire others with. And myself, it does all the time. I'm surrounded by these different images that help me with this, which in the movie, the character is, without going into lots of details, just know that in the second movie, there's a new Buzz that is released by the old Buzz, and the new Buzz doesn't realize he's a toy. And they're trying to go rescue Woody from being sent to Japan by an evil toy collector. And as they're climbing up this elevator shaft, the new Buzz has the toys over his shoulder hanging onto a little rope or something. And he's climbing, he's struggling to get up the wall. And all of a sudden he has this epiphany and he says, he's thinking, I can fly. He's got this button, he says, and he looks over his shoulder and he goes, I'm going to let go of the wall. And they're like, no. And he pushes the button, he lets go and they fall, but the elevator's coming up and he thinks he's flying and they go rescue Woody. Well, my thing is no walls. All right. And the idea behind that is walls are excuses about why you can't do what you're trying to accomplish. And that's something that I try to live by, is that when we run into those frustrating things that are stopping us from moving forward, well, maybe I can go around it this way or around it that way or under it or over it. And so that's my mantra.
Yeah. No walls. Love that. Stephen Miletto, thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. I greatly appreciate it. I love your podcast, and I will again link it in the show notes for our listeners. There are so many ties between education, the future of education, and the future of our workforce and business. And so it's really important to start in the K through 12, start young, figure out what we can do to help support the educational system so that we do support our kids and that they do achieve their dreams, which I know is Stephen's goal here. So with that, thank you for being on Your Brand Amplified, and thank you to the listeners for listening to another episode. I'll be back again in a couple of days with another amazing guest. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.